When the courier knocked on my door on a rainy Tuesday morning, I assumed it was just the final copy of our finalized divorce decree. Instead, I was handed a thick, cream-colored envelope containing a non-disclosure agreement and a cashier's check for exactly $500,000. The attached note from my ex-husband's high-priced attorney was brief, stating that the funds would be cleared the moment I signed the document, promising never to speak publicly about our vacation to Cabo San Lucas in August of 2022. I stared at the check, my hands trembling, as a cold dread settled deep in my stomach. David and I had been divorced for 3 months after a passionless, silent collapse of a 7-year marriage. But this wasn't about asset division. This was hush money, and it meant that the most ordinary, forgettable trip of my life was actually a cover for something truly monstrous. To understand why $500,000 terrified me, you have to understand who David was to the world. He was a rising star in the tech logistics sector, a man whose public persona was built entirely on reliability, charity, and flawless ethics. Our marriage hadn't ended with an explosive fight or a caught-in-the-act affair. It ended because he simply became a ghost in our own home, looking right through me as if I were a piece of furniture. When I asked for the divorce, he didn't even argue. He just nodded, packed his leather suitcases, and left me the house. I thought he was just cold, a man who had outgrown his college sweetheart. But looking at that check, I realized David didn't just walk away from our marriage. He was buying my silence before I even knew what I was staying silent about. I spent the next 3 days sitting on my living room floor, surrounded by old photo albums and digital backups, desperately trying to piece together that week in Mexico. On the surface, the trip had been completely mundane. David had been stressed about a major round of venture capital funding, spending hours on his laptop on the resort balcony while I read by the pool. The only anomaly occurred on our 3rd night. David had gone out alone around midnight, claiming he needed a cigar and a walk to clear his head. When he returned 3 hours later, he was breathless, soaked in sweat, and violently sick in the bathroom. The next morning, he insisted we pack our bags and catch an early flight home, claiming a sudden family emergency that miraculously resolved itself the moment we landed in Austin. I remembered asking him in the airport taxi if he was okay, and he had snapped, "Drop it, Elena. I just need to get back to work." I had dropped it, chalking it up to his volatile anxiety. Now, that ignored warning sign felt like a heavy stone in my throat. Refusing to sign the agreement, I did something desperate. I reached out to Marcus, David's former college roommate and best friend, who had accompanied us on several vacations, but had mysteriously vanished from our social circle right after that Cabo trip. When I called Marcus's mother to ask for his new number, her voice turned to ice. "I can't believe you have the nerve to call this house," she whispered, her voice shaking with a mixture of grief and rage. Before I could defend myself, she dropped a bomb that shattered my reality. Marcus was currently serving a 20-year sentence in a foreign prison for a fatal hit-and-run accident that occurred during our vacation. He had allegedly stolen a rental car, struck a local pedestrian, and fled the scene. The room spun as the pieces began to violently clash together in my mind. Marcus hadn't even been in Mexico with us. He had stayed behind in Texas because of a broken leg. I distinctly remembered visiting him in his apartment the week before we left, seeing the heavy fiberglass cast on his right shin. There was absolutely no physical way Marcus could have driven a car in Cabo, let alone fled a crime scene on foot. I suddenly remembered David's frantic, sweating face in the hotel bathroom, the smell of cheap tequila he had forced down his throat to fake an intoxication alibi, and the way he tightly gripped my wrist when we boarded the plane back to the States. David hadn't been sick from stress. He had killed someone, and somehow, using his immense wealth and legal connections, he had transferred the blame to his vulnerable, debt-ridden best friend. I spent the next week operating in a state of hyper-vigilant numbness. I hired a private investigator who specialized in international legal cases, paying him with the last of my savings. Within 48 hours, he uncovered the horrifying truth. David's company had been on the verge of a multi-million-dollar buyout that week. A criminal charge would have ruined the deal, destroyed his reputation, and bankrupted him. So, David made a deal with Marcus's estranged, heavily indebted older brother to plant Marcus's identification at the rental car agency and bribe local officials to build an airtight,